why is it that we think people are being so skillful when they're using things that seem a little bit underhand?
Yeah, the reason I winced a little bit is I'd hate people to think that the best negotiators are people that use dirty tricks. And I think sometimes if people are using some method of negotiation against you which you can't understand and can't cope with, then you might think that's a dirty trick. But there are other things which are definitely downright dirty tricks and really shouldn't be used in a negotiation where it's important that both sides get a good deal out of it.
And so, Joe, sometimes when we're up against people, what are the things that we see that kind of are a little bit off?
I think when you have negotiations and people are genuinely wanting to get a good deal, they might think by adding just one more extra item to the discussion is valid. It means that we're really focusing on all the topics. But if you've set an agenda and you've identified what topics you're going to discuss during that negotiation, and someone just says, and one more thing I'd like to add on, and one more thing, it takes the discussion away and the power balance changes slightly. So if you can plan ahead for where you want that discussion to go, it gives you a little bit more control.
Okay, so I've heard things like one more thing, sort of advertises that this is a technique you should do. If you've got something to slip in, get something agreed, and then stick an extra one in on the side. Shaun, at the beginning of a lot of programs that we teach, we ask people, tell us what is it that you see the other side doing to get a good deal? What kind of things are you seeing people want help with?
That is a very good question. The most frequent trick, in inverted commas, that people say they come up against is that the other party or the other person negotiating was far better prepared than them.
Mm-hmm.
And they seem to think, so I've heard them say that.
Yeah.
They say that as if that's unfair or wrong. So where does that come from? How does that feel like injustice and not just, you just got beaten?
Yeah, well, I think it obviously comes down to the levels of preparation. We talk a lot about how they prepare the negotiation, but it's just a very curious thing that they see that because they have done much more preparation and they seem to have more information, that is in some way underhand.
So you mentioned information there. When we have a set of information, we're often teaching to use that selectively and carefully. Sometimes people will choose to disclose that information sort of sneakily or at the last minute or put us on the back foot with that. What would you do if someone is to just to introduce things that you really have never even considered, and you're right there in the room with them? It's really put you on the back foot.
Well, for me, firstly, I wouldn't see that as a dirty trick. I would just see that potentially as negotiating skill. Negotiations isn't necessarily about putting all the cards on the table right up front. Holding something back which you think the other party might want or that you might want from the other party is just part of skilled negotiation. I think some of the dirty tricks we'll see are where people might be suggesting that you've put so much into this deal already that you now might as well do it, or you're going to lose quite a lot of money. So we might call that sunk cost. Mm-hmm. So you're going to lose money that you've already sunk into it, or time or effort that you've already sunk into it. We might also see things like time pressures, like somebody saying, well, I need to get this concluded now because I've got another meeting at 3:00 or whatever. So there's a number of obvious dirty tricks, I think, which are there, which I'd be a bit worried about calling a dirty trick somebody preparing. I think we should just prepare as much as anybody else does.
Yeah. What about if you're already in the room and people have, you do start to feel on the back foot. They do start to apply pressure with, as you say, sunk cost or pressure to conclude now, and you aren't feeling that. Joe, what would you do in that situation?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things you can do, but I think the first thing is to have a reflection of where the negotiation's gone up until that point. Remind yourself of the things you've achieved, the common ground that you've got, and maybe any of the agreements with the trades you've already established, and see whether or not it's genuine, the conversation has naturally led that way, or if you feel it's maybe something that needs more time, because you can always call for a timeout. A brief stop during that negotiation where you can collect your thoughts and think, is this something we can commit to now? Or actually, is it a really good topic that needs its own airspace and its own separate meeting?
So we can take control, and we can ask that. Now,
Absolutely.
Shaun, would that apply for those things that people tell us that when they arrive for a meeting, they're already on the back foot, they're thrown into things. Sometimes it feels like people have manipulated a situation to arrange it when they know we're going to be jet lagged, when they know it's a struggle to get there. We've heard of people taking the other team out for kind of a raucous night out right before something like a negotiation.
Well, I guess for me the question is, are these tactics, though, or what we label as dirty tricks, are they intentional tactics, or are they unintentional? And I guess the point for anybody on the receiving end is not to decide whether it's deliberate or not, is to decide how you react to that.
So how do you react to that?
I think what we've got to be very clear about is that there are certain behaviours that we can use to help to counter these, and a set of behaviours which really would help to clarify yours and the other side's position. So summaries, and making sure that they're accurate summaries, and therefore not allowing somebody to slip something else in. Testing understanding to make sure that both of us understand the same things. And then seeking information from somebody. So, or if you think about it, all those three types of behaviours allow you to get clarity, possibly whether this is a dirty trick or whether it's actually for real. So if somebody is saying I'm under time pressure, well, maybe we go back to them and say, well, is this negotiation important to you? Because if it is, as Joe said, we need to take some time out, and we maybe need to come back tomorrow or another time and make sure we get a proper deal, not just a fast deal.
So it's about holding your own through seeking more information about it, or leaning into that.
It's about having an understanding about what behaviours you can use to be able to affect a good outcome to a deal.
It's also, if I can add to that, when you mentioned about going out on a raucous night out the night before, if your experience working with that potential client has been that when you meet, when you're doing the persuasion element before the negotiation, and they take you out for a meal and they wine and dine you, then that's not new behaviour. If that is not what's happened, normally the previous experience has been you have short, sharp meetings that are separate and you go your separate ways, and then all of a sudden they want to do those kind of activities, then it gives you an idea of, is this something that I should stand my ground, or actually is that the next step? So it gives you a chance to reflect, is this behaviour that they are asking about something that is part of the relationship I already have with them, or is it something new for us to consider? How should we respond?
And I think if it is a deliberate tactic, then again, first of all, recognise that that's what's happening, and then decide, is this indicative of the relationship moving forward?
Yeah.
And is there, suppose you are starting to feel sort of more uncomfortable with that overall relationship, what do you do then? Do you because we're at work, we still have to get deals, right?
Yeah, I guess sometimes if it is a deliberate tactic and you suspect that it is, then sometimes you can point it out, draw attention to it.
And how?
I think through those behaviours we were talking about, you can point it out and ask people whether or not this is really what they want to do. But I also think we've got to be careful about not every negotiation that people get involved in fact, very few negotiations that people get involved in are major business negotiations. We're all involved in negotiating every day. And I might think that a raucous night out is actually compulsory rather than a problem. but unfortunately, if I'm just going to go and buy something for my car, I can't get one. So there are dirty tricks that people will be using that they actually don't think are dirty tricks. They're actually taught to do things like they might be saying, for example, if it's a negotiation that's quite simple, that this is the last chance for you to do it because we've only got one left, or whatever it might be, which may or may not be true, and it's crossover with sales techniques, but basically anything that's putting pressure onto you to do something which you might not do if you had time to stand back and think about it, could be considered to be a dirty trick if it's being done on purpose.
And there's a risk that what we do is because we don't want to upset the relationship, we let it slide and let it happen. And of course, there's a risk in that, because that may create an appetite for more. If they get away with it once, then they may continue to use and apply similar tactics.
So in both of these situations that you're describing, either because we're not even at work, it's these kind of rolling negotiations that pop up in life, and in these ones where we value the relationship, we're potentially blindsided by these things that come along, and you're saying that we need to consider in the moment where we go from here. Now that takes a certain amount of presence and planning and knowing exactly what you want. How do we get that? How do we be sure that we are skilled enough in any given moment to take things as they?
I think Shaun alluded to it earlier. Some preparation and planning, and the preparation in terms of knowing what it is that we want, what our objectives are, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, so you might believe what they want. So if there's something that they're doing which feels inconsistent with what you thought, then you've got a good idea that there might be something wrong, in which case you then can start to clarify. So giving some forethought before you get there, even if it's a simple negotiation, just giving some forethought before you get there as to what you're going to want to do, as to how you're going to do it, and what the other side would want to do, how they're going to do it. And coming back to something that was talked about earlier, your information that you want to give, information you want to get, when do you want to give it, when do you want to get it? So it's quite a complex scenario, really.
And I think in addition to some of the behaviours that Tony mentioned, even simple functions like taking a time out during a negotiation, just to give yourself that thinking time and objectively look at the situation and think, well, what's happening here and how do we respond?
Joe, you were going to...
Sorry, Joe.
No, it's absolutely fine. I think that's the thing. And also one of the other behaviours that we haven't mentioned, which does seem to work well, is talking about how you're feeling. And saying things like, I'm surprised, or I'm confused, or I'm really happy that we're working this way. It's another way of gaining that bit of clarity on what their intention is at any point during a complex negotiation, or maybe something that would be considered a bit more routine. But articulating to the other party, I'm surprised that you're adding another issue, or I'm surprised you want to go for a night out drinking when we're this close to sealing the deal. It just allows the other party to respond, and then you can gauge again how I would then react to that.
So that's quite interesting when you talk about giving feelings, because I know when we teach people that, they are often quite surprised that is something that we would say can really help keep a negotiation moving forward, because they have this picture in their mind that to be skilled in negotiation, you need to give nothing away, to be quite poker-faced about it. So what do we do when we're up against those people who seem that way, where whatever you do, you're getting nothing back? Their way of achieving strength is to hardly react at all.
Well, the thing is, you shouldn't do really is for you to overreact, because that is often what people are looking for. A low reaction, and of course by low reaction what we don't mean is necessarily being quiet. For us, low reaction is not giving any not giving any support, or not giving any disagreement. So you just really don't know where that person's coming from. I'll give you a quick example of that. If you were going to buy a car, and the car salesman said to you, do you like the red colour? Ask him if it comes with a radio with digital in it. Don't respond to the colour question, because you're actually not giving any support, and you're not giving any disagreement. Therefore, the person doesn't know where you're coming from, and will continually sometimes try to force reactions by giving you more things.
Okay.
But I guess in that type of situation, you're looking essentially for a win-lose outcome.
Yeah, you're not worried about a long-term relationship. Yeah, absolutely.
So that comes back a little bit to where we started, in that some of these things are not particularly, we've said it a few times, they're not particularly sort of dirty or underhand or anything, but it does depend on what kind of outcome we're looking for. People have a very confused view sometimes on what win-win really means, and we teach quite often that it's not win-win doesn't have to mean 50-50. When we are looking for an outcome, what kind of outcome, what is it that we are looking for?
we're looking for both parties to be happy with the agreement that's been made. So whether that's 90-10 or 60-40 or even 20-80, whatever the percentage is, both parties need to leave the table, the negotiation table, with an agreement that they can go back to their mandate, their internal people, and say, here's what we've got, and it's good for us. And if it's good for the other party, then the chances are it's going to have a high successful implementation. If one of the party comes away thinking, I've been done to, I've really got a bad deal, then it will impact a longer term relationship that you'll have.
I think you've got to remember, Benjamin, that the most successful negotiations are likely to happen when each party has got a different objective. And you shouldn't necessarily assume that the parties have the same objective. So you want a high price, I want a low price. That's a difficult negotiation to have. I want the most efficient solution for my business, and you want the best price as the seller. That's probably a negotiation where you can get an outcome that could be 50-50.
So that comes back to that prep and planning, where we might advise people to actually work through and try and get as many issues down as they could possibly think of, and then also as many options or ways of achieving each of those those issues. So I guess we're stemming into teaching sort of best practice and not just the dirty tricks. But thank you for your thoughts on it, everyone. Is there any one last thing you would say about advice to anyone listening for either tricks they can play or what to do when they find themselves off guarded by some?
Well, I think for me, with any of these tactics we've been talking about, it is a form of pressure to get the deal that you want. So you're applying pressure to the party to get them to make concessions. And if you don't have in your preparation a strong, what we call fallback, in other words, a plan B, if you've got nowhere else to go, then those tactics might just work against you.
I think I would say be prepared to listen to what it is that they're saying, what you think might be a trick. So things like, I have to change the negotiator because so-and-so can't make the meeting anymore. Then acknowledge it and think, well, maybe because of a change in the scenario, maybe gives you an opportunity to think, have we got the right people in the negotiation? Mm-hmm. So really, whatever you're coming across, give yourself time to think, is there something that we would need to do now ourselves on our side of the table to reflect the change that's being asked, rather than just accepting and going along with it?
I think for me, I'd come back the other way with one thing that can be possibly seen as a dirty trick, which is what I said earlier, which is be careful about reacting to things straight away. Get a little bit of low reaction sometimes, not supporting and not disagreeing rather, gives you a little bit more time, and you don't have to backstep from it. Mm-hmm. So just keep the doors open and the balls up in the air, basically. Excellent.
Okay, so let's just do one more dirty trick each. Shaun.
Well, I'm drawn to the good cop, bad cop routine.
Yeah,
I think we've all seen it in American cop shows, but that can happen in negotiation as well. Now, again, the question is that something deliberate, or is that just their personalities that you're dealing with? And I think if it is deliberate, why do they do that? I think it creates a bit of confusion. It disturbs the other party, and I think maybe the intention is to get a good deal from doing that. But I guess we're not that concerned with the cause of it, but it's the effect of it.
So what is that effect?
Well, again, it can be confusion, but I think it's just recognising, is this what's happening? Mm. And we've talked about some of the simple things that you can do to help deal with a situation like that. One is, if you feel uncomfortable about the behaviour, then you can express that you're uncomfortable. Give feelings. And if all else fails, if one person is playing good cop, the other plays bad cop, then talk to the good cop.
One more from you.
I think one that I hear common both in business and personal negotiations that I deal with is, I haven't the authority. So you've been talking to someone, you think you're getting close to a reasonable deal, and then all of a sudden they say, I can't agree this. I have to go and speak with my manager or somebody else in the organization. So personally, that's normally when I'm buying a car and it's all of a sudden every little thing I've asked for, they have to go around the corner and speak to the boss. Or sometimes in business, they will say, you know, I haven't got the mandate. And it's an interesting one because it could be genuine. It could be that the discussion's gone outside and the agreement does generally need to be assessed by somebody else to get internal buy-in. And then if that's the case, then you also can go back to your company and speak to senior management or your own boss to say, here's where we're up to with the deal. Can I check that we're still happy with it? Or if you feel it's a tactic, then maybe ask, well, maybe I shouldn't be negotiating with yourself. Can I negotiate going forward with that other person? Because obviously, you know, you don't want to waste anybody's time. And if they don't have the authority to make any final agreements, then go to the person that can.
Because I've seen that not only done, but I've seen that advised almost as a version of good cop, bad cop, with the bad cop out of the room. I'm with you on this. I would love for this to happen. I don't think my people are going to agree it.
Yeah.
And it's always a generic, vague version of those other people. So although I've seen that advised as a trick to use, I would be very tempted to say, did you not check with them before?
Yeah.
Before you came here? What are we doing here? And I think that we've got license to ask those things if
Absolutely.
our purpose is to get a deal.
And at the beginning of the negotiation, and it might be in the negotiation might be multiple meetings where genuinely people will change depending on the complexity. At every start, you can just say, is everybody? Are you the authorized person? Are we ready to make it? Can we get a closure on this meeting, or is this a meeting to move it forward? So you can always start each meeting with just making sure in the sort of the preliminary stages that you are speaking to the right person. And if not, should we reschedule when they are available? And you can do things again very honestly and very above board.
Excellent. Tony?
Not sure what you'd call this one, but I can perhaps give you an example of it. A couple of years ago, I was called to a meeting with a very large client of ours, and not in the UK, so there's a fair amount of travel involved. Expected to see a manager there that I dealt with, and he was there, as was a number of other people. And then 5 minutes as we're doing the opening to the meeting, a director walked in, sat down, and started to say things like, well, we've been using you for a long time, but we've noticed that things aren't going so well. We know that we have other options that are probably 25% cheaper than you are. And you could tell at this point that he's starting to put some competitive pressure on and playing bad cop. So there was a little bit of staring at each other, and I'd got my books open, and at that point I just closed the books and shut them and looked at him and said, well, why am I here? Because if we're here to negotiate about where we're going to go from here forward, then we're going to negotiate from here forward. If we're not, and we're not going to do it, then why have you invited me all this way over to talk to you and this group of people around the table? At which point there was another little bit of conversation, and he got up and walked out. And then we had a very good negotiation with the rest of the people around the table. So he'd obviously been brought in a little bit on the good cop, bad cop stuff. He was going to come in and try and put some pressure on. And at that point, you've got to say, well, is this realistic? Is it realistic? And if it is, we've also had ones where people have said to us, you're in the last three, but there's somebody else who is 50% cheaper than you are. So by saying to them, well, do you get the same outcomes? Do you get the same materials? Do you get the same inputs, et cetera, et cetera? If they say yes, then why on earth are they going to go with
why are they still talking
with you?
to us?
Why are they still talking to us? So you've just got to test those things again, just to see what's reality and what isn't reality.
So it's about having the confidence to be able to ask about it, and that confidence comes from the amount of preparation and planning and thinking as the other party.
Absolutely, and knowing your own situation. I mean, if we really had made a mess up of the work with this client, then I'd probably be apologising rather than saying, well, why am I here? But we knew we hadn't, so it was a dirty trick.